Devastation in Morocco. Thousands have died and entire villages destroyed after the country's strongest earthquake in 60 years strikes near Marrakesh. We'll look at rescue efforts now underway. Also on the program, an ominous anniversary. 50 years after General Augusto Pinochet staged a military coup in Chile. We'll look at how the dictator's legacy still polarizes the country today. I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is The Newsmakers. Well, rescue teams in Morocco's remote Atlas Mountains have been using their bare hands to dig for survivors after this weekend's devastating earthquake. Entire villages lie in ruins, some with most inhabitants either confirmed dead, hospitalized, or missing. The 6.8 magnitude quake struck just below the mountain villages south of Marrakesh. 3 days later, international aid has arrived, but officials and rescue teams face an uphill battle, transporting equipment via damaged roads to remote villages across the mountainous region.
We are in the town of Imintala. It is very remote and it took us about 8 hours to get here. There were no rescue groups and we arrived with the police. The destruction is absolute. All the buildings have collapsed. We will begin our search using dogs and try to find survivors.
Well, joining me now to talk more about the rescue and recovery operations underway in Morocco are from Casablanca. Nabil Adel, he is the director of the Geopolitics and Geo-economics Research Group at ESCA. He also served as counselor to the Speaker of the Moroccan Parliament. From Perth, Australia, Chris Elders, a visiting professor at the School of Earth and Planetary Sciences. And from Geneva, Tommaso Della Longa, spokesperson for the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Thanks all so much for being with us. Let's begin then with Tommaso, because we need to ask what Morocco really is up against right now. So much of the damage is in these mountainous and rural areas, which are always the most difficult to access. So describe what search and rescue workers are facing right now on the ground and how people would be coping.
Well, the situation is absolutely complex, and the needs are growing. What we can hear from our colleagues of the Morocco Red Crescent, who are working hand in hand with local and national authorities, it's a situation of damaged infrastructure, road blockages. So also reaching the areas affected by the earthquake, as you correctly said, the rural areas, the areas in the mountains, is very, very complicating. And then also keeping in a safe place the people who survived. So I would say injured, so transporting them to the hospital, but also people who doesn't have any more, sadly, a home. And then all the next steps, because, I mean, we don't have to forget that this kind of natural disaster, to recover from them, it will take weeks and months, in some cases years. So the wave of solidarity, but also the wave of attention to the people affected by the earthquake, it needs to be there also in the future.
Yeah. Nabil, let me turn to you. You are in Morocco, of course. I mean, had you ever actually thought of the possibility of a quake this size striking where it has? And where does it stand right now from your perspective on the recovery efforts? Is there more international aid needed? What are you seeing?
Yes, let me start by telling the personal experience. It was around 11 o'clock in the afternoon PM, and it lasted 3 to 4 seconds. And we couldn't believe it was quite sudden and strong. We are in Casablanca, so quite 100 miles far from the center of the earthquake, and we felt the movement of the earth. People were running to the streets. I think they stayed there up until the dawn, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. So people were absolutely shocked, and some of them panicked. We had this large movement of people going at the same time on the street. So at the time, we couldn't imagine the damage that this earthquake inflicted to Morocco. That we had the first information in the morning, and it was really devastating. I think it's the hardest earthquake that Morocco experienced since 100 years. So it is very, very tough earthquake. So right now the help is being organized. His Majesty gave his instructions to mobilize the army, the police, and the civil society. We are all mobilized to come to help people. Not far from this morning, I was a part of a group who sent blankets and foods to the south. But as it was being said, we are facing a very tough infrastructure that was completely destroyed.
Right.
And
it's
and we
amazing
have
to
a
see
lot of
the worst of times really bring out the best of humanity, which seems to be what you're seeing now in Morocco,
Yes,
Nabil.
yes.
But let me turn to Chris Elders quickly, because I need to ask if an earthquake of this magnitude should have been expected here, and now could there be more, not least major aftershocks? I mean, we've heard 60 to 100 years since the last major earthquake. That was before many Moroccans were even born. So how much could have been expected? I mean, did this catch you by surprise?
Yes, it was unusual for an earthquake of this magnitude to occur in this particular area. There are earthquakes quite commonly in other parts of Morocco and in neighboring Algeria. So we know it's an active area, but the High Atlas hasn't experienced significant earthquakes for a long time. So it was a surprise in many respects. And yes, with regards to aftershocks, there's always the risk of that. In fact, quite interestingly, in this case, there have been very few aftershocks. Only 2 that have been measured. I think there's been a lot of other smaller ones that people have felt locally, but not big enough to be picked up on seismometers that are in the area. But it's clearly a danger and a risk that there will be further aftershocks that will follow.
And how vulnerable, from your judgment, is the actual infrastructure in these areas?
Well, that's a little bit difficult to say from a distance, but the problem with aftershocks is that any buildings that are unstable can then fall and collapse. I think the other big concern about aftershocks is that people are already feeling very nervous and insecure. All their frames of reference have changed and gone, and for further aftershocks to occur can cause much greater psychological trauma as well, which is an important consideration in earthquakes.
Okay. Tommaso, let me come back to you quickly, because, you know, humanity has a habit of quickly forgetting, especially with the news cycles that we have, that people are in dire need of help, especially after a disaster like this. So how much international support is going to be needed? How much has come forward, and how much will you need to do your job properly?
Well, of course, we will need to have an assessment in the next couple of hours to understand exactly the needs, but also the needs for the future, because then there is a first phase, which is happening now, so saving lives, search and rescue, a second phase, and then which is next steps right after the earthquake, and then a third phase, which is the recovery. So I would say that it's complicated to give, let's say, a figure, but what it's for sure, and thank for the question, is that the solidarity needs to be there also in the next weeks and months. I mean, we saw it also in the country where you are, in Turkey, and which was hit 6 months ago by the earthquake, together with Syria. And of course, there was a huge wave of solidarity at the beginning, a huge visibility, and then this decreased. We called not more than a month ago on partners and donors to continue supporting people affected by the earthquake in Syria and in Turkey 6 months ago. So this for sure will be the case for Morocco. And again, there are something that needs to happen now, but needs to be carried on. Your other guest was talking correctly about the psychological effects. For us, it's really critical to intervene immediately, and this is why we started through our Morocco Red Crescent team psychosocial support immediately, because this kind of fears will stay with people, not for a day, not for 2, not for a week, but for months. And it is really critical to start immediately to work on that, and then to continue in a sustainable way.
Okay, Nabil, I'll let you finish with that. I mean, tell us, as a Moroccan on the ground now, what you want to see going forward as far as what services are delivered, how people are cared for, and also in hindsight, if you could have fixed whatever issues there may have been, what would you have changed to try to mitigate the damage you're seeing now? Was there something that could have been done? I mean, once in 100 years, but still, maybe people could have known that they were vulnerable.
Tommaso said, now we are in the beginning of the process. And what is needed right now, I think there is little chance that we can find any survivors. But now we are thinking about people who are suffering now, and what we need now, practically more tents, more blankets. People are starting to rebuild their houses, and this needs a major support domestically and internationally. People are now being served in terms of food and beverage, so there is no problem there. But the main issue we're facing right now is that people need tents, need blankets. It's cold up there, and it's a matter of survival. As for your second question, in fact, these are rural areas, and the damage is big. But what can be changed in the future is to observe the earthquake standards in terms of construction and building infrastructures and homes. Today, we saw that good and solid infrastructure resists more than old ones, and we need to issue a regulation as far as possible about generalizing the anti-seismic standards in all areas in Morocco.
Very important. Okay. Nabil, you will have to have the final word because unfortunately we are completely out of time for this segment of the Newsmakers, but I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us. Thank you.